The following voicemail messages were sent between Michael and Andy over a number of days and contain spoilers.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey, man. It's a pretty sweltering heat here. Just running out to do a last-minute emergency supermarket run. End of the evening. Been a pretty exhausting day. Last night, or was it last night? I can't remember, was it last night or the night before? It might have been the night before. We watched Manhunter by Michael Mann. Hadn't seen it since I was a teenager. Not quite sure whether I was like a good age or where I was in my knowledge of Lecter or Mann, but I had seen it at some point and didn't leave much of an impression on me. I think the only thing I really remember from that first viewing is all that stuff of Bill Petersen up in a tree or looking through a window going like, you did it, didn't you? You watched it. You watched them. You didn't keep your hands off them, or all that like ridiculous stuff. Now watching it now, I'm a huge Silence fan. I'm a huge, everything up until Michael Mann discovers digital film fan. And it's there's a lot in it there for me to enjoy at this point. That said, it is not a patch on Silence of the Lambs, in my opinion. Although it is a patch, or it's beyond a patch, to coin a phrase, on all the other Hannibal Lecter movies, Red Dragon and Hannibal. I haven't actually seen Hannibal Rising, and I've barely seen the TV show. I know it's very highly regarded, but I watched a handful of episodes and wasn't digging it, so it's just this weird inconvenience for this movie that it's destined to be compared to maybe the best serial killer movie of all time, and kind of a perfect movie that just sort of holds up over and over again on repeat viewings. But Manhunter itself is a good time. Because I'd already seen it, albeit 20 plus years ago, I thought, I'll watch this so-called director's cut. Maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe it'll be like, it might have more of an impact. Now I'm a big Michael Mann fan, and just put a different spin on it. But it was one of these classic cases of, I don't think this really is a director's cut. I think this is just people putting back in the deleted scenes that were on some DVD at some point. Because the quality of the picture would occasionally dip. I was like, okay, I've mainly been watching really well remastered Blu-ray quality footage, but then every now and again I'm getting something sort of standard definition DVD quality, and that was a deleted scene. And those deleted scenes didn't add anything of value whatsoever to the movie. So, pro tip there, if anyone is ever interested in watching Manhunter, just go classic Manhunter. It's interesting to see the other stuff, but it's not better to see the other stuff. But it doesn't detract too much from the movie. I think for me, we watched Thief a few months ago, which I think is Mann's directorial debut, and this is, I think, in his first 3 movies. Thief has a little brief appearance of Petersen, Like, I mean, I wouldn't even call it a cameo because it's not famous. It's just like, he must just have known that guy or, you know, had some connection with him because he went from giving him like 2 seconds in Thief to the starring role in Manhunter. But Petersen just isn't up to... He's not terrible by any means. I wouldn't say he's that bad. But imagining this movie with, let's say, Pacino or, you know, just like an actor with a lot of gravitas in that part, hunting down the Manhunter, you just get a much better film, in my opinion. And also that you just compare it to how interesting a character and how great a performance you get in the next movie from Clarice Starling, Jodie Foster. I think a combination of how the character is written with the limitations of Petersen as an actor just take this, it just limits it a little bit. Because it's kind of the worst thing in the movie in a way, even though it's not that bad, his performance. Like, I just think there's one bit, you know, when Lecter tells him, he gives him this little kind of clue, this little insight into the psychology of the serial killer, where he says, you know, if you do as God does enough times, then you become God. And that kind of unlocks a little approach in his mind, and he goes back to the house with this new little nugget in his brain of like, you meaning the serial killer, you came here as a god. You're on an ever-growing power journey. And that scene where he gets back to the apartment, it's like his second or third time going there, that's done in voiceover rather than him actually like vocalizing his thoughts. And it's just so much better than all the other scenes where we've seen him like out loud in a really hammy way saying all this stuff, like talking to the serial killer. So I wish they had done the whole thing like that. I wish it had all been voiceover instead of him speaking out loud. And some of it they kind of try and justify it by him speaking into a dictaphone, but it still doesn't really work that much. Like, he's just so untogether and also like so inefficient. Like, he's obviously famously the guy who caught Hannibal Lecter, and then in this movie he's the guy who caught the Tooth Fairy. So he's supposed to be this brilliant FBI profiler or whatever, but he's all of his method, his like sort of spellbindingly brilliant approach to catching serial killers, it all kind of counts for nothing. Like, he spends literally the whole movie profiling the Tooth Fairy, trying to get in his head, you know, go, this guy's about this, and it's the mirrors. He wanted them to see the mirror, like all of this like vague bullshit, while the rest of the police are like, you know, running fingerprints and DNA samples and like, you know, try to do like actual police work. He's doing all this airy-fairy stuff. And then at the end of the movie, he manages to figure out and catch the Tooth Fairy because he's watching the videos, and he realizes that the videos show that the garage door was closed by a padlock, and that the back door was glass, and that couldn't have been seen from the street. And then he, you know, they try and sort of push that into him going back into profiling mode of like, it's all about seeing for you, isn't it? It's all about looking. But really, it's just like, no, you've now watched the videos enough times that you have seen like a bit of very objective clinical evidence that doesn't require any kind of psychological profiling, and that's how you catch the serial killer. And it kind of almost feels like if he'd been more focused on just like a very pragmatic reading of the evidence, that could have even come up earlier. So even though I love things like Mindhunter, where they catch the killer based off of piecing together this psychological portrait, and not only do I love fiction like that or media like that, but I also think it works. Like, I'm not even a skeptic of that approach. But within this movie, he just, as a hero of a serial killer movie on the hunt, he basically does nothing for the entire movie, which is kind of almost cool. Like, he's just, I got nothing. I don't have a clue. And at the end of the movie, he just spots like a pretty, like, it's a pretty well observed piece of evidence that goes, oh, he's seen these tapes, and then, you know, that's it. Like, case closed at that point. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Obviously got all the vibey stuff of Michael Mann, all of the neon, very Blade Runner synth soundtrack. Yeah, like I as I'm watching it, I'm like, all of that stuff is great, but it's kind of done better, but it's certainly in a better movie in Heat. And we've also just recently seen Thief, which is earlier and better, in my opinion. So I think Manhunter is like a massively overrated movie, and I think that's come from it being such an underrated movie. It's this weird thing of like, it used to be when I was first made aware of it, it was like a very underrated movie because it was just completely dismissed as being like, well, why would you watch that when you've got Silence of the Lambs? And so no one was really giving it its dues. And then I think people have kind of countered that almost, and now sort of elevated to the point of like, it's one of his best movies. Some people are saying it is the best movie in the franchise. And I think that's now gone way too far in that direction. For me, it's a good, solid movie worth watching. I tell you what, I love the stuff where they're actually like really pressed for time and they're trying to make a call on, like, can they decipher that note in the Tatler on time and get that out, and everyone's kind of chipping in, everyone's working together. In other words, the stuff where it becomes less of a vibey movie and more of a sort of brass tacks procedural, that to me is when the film's at its best. But a lot of what is going on in the film, I think, is like, it just feels like we're kind of getting like not one of the best Michael Mann movies, but still good stuff because it's Michael Mann. So, and then like, we're getting not one of the best leading men that he had. His work with Daniel Day-Lewis, his work with De Niro, Chilino, his work with Russell Crowe. Like, it feels like Petersen is just not, he's, you know, even James Caan, it was his first movie, like that, it could have been interesting to bring him back with this. But also, like, there was plenty of shots and moments in there where I was like, oh man, he has such a cool style, didn't he? And it's so sad that he went down that digital route and started making like horrific looking movies. Anyway, good flick. I'm not sure if you're planning to check it out, but if you do, let me know your thoughts.
Hey man, I had hoped to reply to this voice note from the funky ass audio headphones and mic that I got, but obviously that isn't working, so I'm holding the phone up to my mouth like a chump, very 19th century. So yeah, my first encounter with Manhunter was when I was watching Red Dragon with my mom, and she was saying, I swear I've seen this before. And I was kind of like, Mom, this movie just came out. There's no way you've seen this movie. And I remember her saying, no, this guy climbs up a tree. And then lo and behold, Edward Norton did climb up a tree. And it's quite funny that striking scene, it seems to be the one thing you remember as well. And I remember looking it up afterwards and then realizing, oh, this is a remake of a 1986 Michael Mann movie, Manhunter. And you talked a little in your voice message about the time that you saw it originally and the frame of mind you were in. Well, I remember the frame of mind I was in at the time. I think I had seen Heat, a movie which it took me a long time to love or even like, and I remember I watched it last year and I thought, okay, I fucking love this movie now. So back then I remember watching a movie from 1986, pre Silence of the Lambs Hannibal Lecter, played by Brian Cox. There's no way I'm going back watching this. But me in 2024, when you suggested that you were watching it and it might be something we could talk about, I jumped at the chance. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Michael Mann now. Finally get Heat, how great it is. I mean, it seems pretty obvious in retrospect. And I watched Thief as well a few weeks ago or a few months ago, like you. So the chance to watch this was very intriguing to me. You mentioned William Petersen. I didn't really remember him in Thief. From what I remember reading this afternoon, it was actually Mann saw him in To Live and Let Die in LA, which is the only other movie I remember ever seeing him in that convinced him to cast him in this. Yeah, Manhunter, it's an interesting movie, man. It's kind of in opposition to itself in terms of, I presume, the source material in the book and what I feel interests Michael Mann as a director and to attach himself to projects. Like if you take Heat, if you take Thief, if you take Ferrari, that I've seen recently as well. I was talking to a friend about this, and we were discussing what's the one word that comes to mind when you think of Michael Mann, and it's professional, you know. And he hires a lot of people who are consultants, like Dennis Farina used to be a cop. He hires people that in Thief, actually, he hires someone who used to actually be a thief. So authenticity and the inner details of things is really what interests him, as well as people being very professional in their job and being very workmanlike in their job, and also being obsessive to the point of maybe crazy. And maybe that's Michael Mann himself and the details in these movies. I don't know. I've never so much as listened to an interview of the guy. But in Ferrari, it's about winning that race at the cost of lives. In Thief, it's about following your code to the cost of your relationships and things like that. And I can't really remember what that trade line was in Heat, but it probably would have been in Robert De Niro's character. So in Manhunter, again, we get the movie almost starts like a Western where we have William Petersen and Dennis Farina at a beach, and Dennis Farina's talking. It's a very low key start, and he's saying, "Oh, we need you to come back. We need you to catch this guy." Then we don't know the implications at the time, and I'd forgotten quite a bit of what happened in Red Dragon because I've seen it a hell of a long time ago. And you know, it's a very low-key start to a movie, which is fantastic. If you imagine how the origin of these superhero movies, the origin of these serial killer movies, how they come about now, we would, I guess we saw a little bit of the camera work in the beginning, but we didn't see a really heinous crime or something crazy happen. Well, it's a very low-key start. And yeah, so the thread lines that I found true to Michael Mann's other films, and what I liked about this is someone being obsessed with a case at the detriment of his own health and his own relationships is something that occurs again and again in Michael Mann's work, and I saw it here. Now, what you mentioned about William Petersen, yeah, he's okay. In many ways, he's not the right man for this job. In terms of the role, in many ways, there's certain scenes where he's talking to himself and he's trying to do that whole Jeff Goldblum thing of cold. What'd you say? A cold? Oh, let's put let's fucking put a virus into alien's computer. That very kind of like working through your mind to get to the clue. He's not good at that. But like I said, I feel like what Michael Mann is interested in and what the source material is interested in comes into conflict quite a bit in this movie, because where the movie is at its biggest strengths to me is not exceptional people in terms of absolute geniuses. It's more in terms of people working the case, in terms of finding the forensics, in terms of finding this letter, passing it on to another expert who's saying, oh, well, Lecter's smart, but I'm smarter. In terms of Will Graham's scenes with Hannibal Lecter, where he admits Hannibal Lecter's smarter than him, but he's trying to find an angle. And I think, and maybe this might, again, is part of the central conflict I'm talking about, I don't think we're meant to believe Will Graham is exceptionally smart, like more so than any other FBI agent. I think we're meant to believe he's got experience in that field and he's dedicated, and those two things are enough, and dedicated to the point of obsession. Because if you remember how he caught Hannibal Lecter when they revealed that scene, it's the fact that he was in his office, he saw a book, and then that book was related to a clue, and that's how he caught him. So it wasn't fantastic police work per se. It was the same way where he's looking at the case and he realizes, okay, the pictures or the videos, he must have been able to see the videos of these couples' houses and everything. I thought that was a really good scene, actually. And it's very good police work. It's not the usual, this guy's an absolute genius. So I really like those type of scenes where it's people being good at their job, it's people, working hard, and that's what's getting it done. But I'm presuming, and based on the other adaptations since, that the nucleus of the book, where it comes from, is we're meant to believe that Will Graham is this exceptional genius, and we're meant to believe that all these people are absolutely way beyond the norm. And I think when William Petersen is trying to do his workman-like routine and being good at his job, I think he's been very good in that movie. And then when he's trying to do anything extra, where he's trying to convey his emotions and his working through the case in his head, which he does out loud, he falls flat, and that's quite cringy at times, and he's not above that. And apparently this movie has been very influential in CSI and things like that, and how it went about the forensic side of the investigation, which ironically apparently is where William Petersen ended up. I wasn't aware of that. And another thing that was striking to me this time as well is how much Anthony Hopkins' performance is similar to Brian Cox's. Now, I I've watched this movie in a pre-Succession world, so I half expected Hannibal Lecter to tell Will Graham to fuck off. Why don't you fuck off? But it's certain, like, Brian Cox isn't an actor that I've never really thought much of, in terms of, not that he's a bad actor, but I can't really remember anything particularly memorable about him. But I absolutely loved his performance in Succession. So looking back at his Hannibal Lecter performance, his enunciation and how he talks is obviously, this was before Anthony Hopkins' performance, but it was very similar. Just Anthony Hopkins is more crisper, more like insidious and more menacing. And maybe the cadence of that is written into the dialogue in the book. I don't know, but it was a much more similar performance in many ways than I would have expected. It's just more Silence of the Lambs gets the level of spectacle right, whereas this is a very procedural, people working a case that just happens to be like really fucked up, but it's kind of just another day at the office in terms of police work. That's what I thought anyway. And what else? Yeah, I thought Tom Noonan, I actually thought it was one of the Carradines for a minute before I looked up afterwards. But Tom Noonan as the serial killer, I thought he was really good, looked really menacing, very good physical performance. Really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed the time Michael Bay, again, Michael Mann. Michael Bay would blow up the fucking cell in Act 2. The time Michael Mann took to show the love story, or at least, I guess you could call it a love story, between the Tooth Fairy killer and the blind woman, and how we just get quite a few moments between them that shows a different side to the serial killer. Now, it makes them completely creepy and everything, but it does take the time to give us things that this character does outside of murdering families, and just how awkward he is and just how broken he is. And there's a great scene where Will Graham is saying that he says his heart bleeds for the boy who got abused and everything, but he also wants to see this guy absolutely taken down. And he said, he was saying, is that hard for you to believe, or is that hard for you to get your head around that? And Michael Mann does spend a few moments. We even get like an 80s kind of love soundtrack between them at one point, and in the background we're seeing his lair, but obviously because she's blind, she's seeing it, or not seeing it, should I say, but she's feeling it sensorily different. And like you, I absolutely lament the fact that Michael Mann has discovered digital later in his career, because he's so good at lighting scenes, and he's so good at capturing water. He's so good at just, it's almost like, not to say a comic book, but it's almost like some of his shots are like Frank Miller-esque, or just like, it's almost something you were seeing where Nolan has got his style from completely, and transferred into something like The Dark Knight and things like that. That's something I definitely felt about Teeth as well. And I agree with you as well when you were saying that this movie is perhaps overestimated in how good it is now, because there's, people have found it now, and everyone wants to champion an underserved movie. I would say I think it's the second best Hannibal movie in the series of the franchise. I definitely think it's the second best. Take that what you want with that. Do what you want with that. But yeah, another movie from the Mann catalog to tick off. Oh yeah, and the other thing you were saying was I avoided the director's cut as well, because I just, like you said, sometimes it's the director's cut, like the Snyder cut, where they add in something that the director sees the value, and sometimes it's like every scene that was ever filmed we're going to put into this. So I just watched the 2-hour version, which I presume, based on the copy I had, and looking at the runtime here, that's the exact amount. But there was a few scenes that did seem a little bit warped, but I thought that was a visual. But just here and there. But I do believe I got the version that was intended by Michael Mann, but it's interesting. I don't know how much extra it added to your runtimes, but 2 hours is probably the right amount for this movie. And the maximum amount of time for a movie like this. Oh yeah, one other thing that I really liked about this as well was in the visualization and the psychological portrayal of why he was doing the killings. I thought that was really cool in terms of the seeing himself admired in their eyes, the serial killer, I mean, and how Michael Mann depicted the kind of like white glow from their eyes, and the whole thing of he's trying to transform these people into things that could love him. That's like pretty sinister and pretty fucked up, especially when you look into what he was transforming them into, and the psychology of only the most fucked up corpses and most fucked up people could actually find love in the eyes of this serial killer. Really enjoyed the psychology of that as well, and Michael Mann's portrayal of that was really cool as well, and his portrayal of he done really cool camera tricks at the time, at certain times, like when we see Petersen's character in the prison, and how he doesn't want to be cooped up around Lecter because of their past history, and the way it's shot very claustrophobic and very POV like as he leaves the building. That was really cool. So there's lots of very Man-esque, well, is it esque if it's the actual person? Very signature Man trademark visual flourishes that are very unshowy but add so much to a scene that they're definitely there at very nice times in this as well.
Hey Matt, beautiful Tuesday morning, just walking out, heading into the office today. Hopefully the weather holds all day. It's a bit windy, so hopefully you can hear me fine. But yeah, feel like we might be on sort of similar enthusiasm levels with Manhunter. It's again, just keep going back to this thing of like, it's a very good movie, but it's difficult to avoid comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, because it's right there, and it's not only is it Silence in the same franchise, it's also like quite similar in the plot, like FBI agent trying to track down freaky serial killer and manages to do it by occasionally going for these really sinister meetings with Lecter. Of course, it doesn't have the big Lecter has a more, he gets up to more, let's say that, in the in Silence. I don't know whether to call it the sequel or what. I mean, you referred to Red Dragon as a remake of Manhunter. I would say they're both adaptations of the same novel, but it's a difficult franchise to kind of reconcile as you would your standard franchise where you're going prequel, sequel, this, that, the other. Anyway, in terms of your points that you made there about Mann's fascination with professionals, I mean, that definitely rings true. You listed a couple of movies, but we can certainly go beyond them with things like Ali and stuff. He loves that. He absolutely loves that. And Miami Vice, Collateral, certainly. He likes just sort of focusing in on how professional and let's be honest, professional men do their thing, how they do their job. It's often crime related, whether it's catching criminals or being a criminal. I agree though that the film is almost at its best when it's stepping away from brilliant, like untouchably brilliant police work and getting down to the nitty gritty of like how police work actually works. Because if you look at something like Heat, that feels it even though De Niro and Pacino are both clearly very accomplished in their work, they're not untouchably accomplished. They're not like superhuman levels of better than anyone in history in their respective careers. And I think that's a massive strength of that movie. It's like everyone in the film, every police officer, every bank robber or whatever, they're just as good as your job as you'd be if you worked at it for decades, you know, which is very good. But they haven't reached some like superhuman level above it. And I think where Manhunter falls down a little bit for me is when it does sort of delve into that elevated cinematic brilliance where they're almost like autistic savant at doing their job. That's a sort of tired trope that, yes, has been done well many, many times and then will be done well many times again. You know, like look at Daniel Craig in the Knives Out movies, for example. But at the same time, it can be really dull and boring if it's, put it this way, if you're going to say that this person is the most brilliant person ever in their field, then you also have to dazzle me. It's not enough that they dazzle everyone else there. Like, we're watching X-Files at the moment, and Mulder is brilliant. And how that manifests, at least in the first couple of seasons, is he's just always right. Like, he can walk into any situation and be like, it'll be this, it'll be that, like just jumping to these ridiculous conclusions with no one would do that. I think X-Files probably gets better, and I'm very much enjoying it. I mean, watched 2 episodes last night that were sensational, but it's a running joke that myself and my wife have that, like, yeah, Mulder basically has just already seen the episode, and that's in a you know, watching an old TV show, that's kind of charming because it's such a silly trope. But in this movie, which is a lot more serious, and when compared to Thief and Heat, it sits awkwardly in the movie, that kind of brilliant savant lane that he sort of clicks into every now and again, like that. And it's also so camp the way they portray it, you know? Like, if you look at something like Mindhunter, which again has a bit of that sort of, this guy can just see far beyond what your average person could see, maybe because he's a bit crazy. And again, I'm so sick of that trope. But, you know, granted, this film was from mid-80s. I don't think we were as saturated in serial killer stuff. In fact, it's hard to even think of much in the way of serial killer movies from earlier than this. So I'm sure that a lot of this wasn't tired upon the release of Manhunter. But nevertheless, watching it now, when he switches into that like mystical lane, where he's basically able to kind of mind read the Tooth Fairy. It seems so silly. And when they're in that room together, like all the cops, and they're trying to, they know that they probably can't decipher that message in time, but they're going to try. Should they run their ad or should they run Lecter's ad? All that stuff is brilliant, and it's just so believable. And then, as I said, when he ultimately does catch the Tooth Fairy, and like you said, when he catches Lecter, it comes down to just good old-fashioned police work. It doesn't actually hinge. In fact, I would argue that his obsession with like trying to empathize with the killer and all that has barely even helped him. Now, you could argue that maybe he wouldn't have watched the videotapes the like 500th time were he not so obsessed with like getting into the head of the serial killer. So that does sort of like line up with this thing of like, you really, really got to like immerse yourself in this man, this killer. But the way it's portrayed in the movie and all these like scenes of like where he's speaking out loud and all that stuff, that doesn't work for me, and it holds the movie back. And again, a better performance can sell a lot of shit that you're like, and sometimes you'll watch a movie and be like, that material in anyone else's hands would be ridiculous, but that actor manages to sell it. This is kind of like the opportunity to watch the opposite, where you go, Bill Petersen is like a competent actor. I'm surprised you didn't know he was in CSI. I mean, that's certainly what I think of him. And I think he's perfectly fine. Nothing against him. Yeah, like I said, just Live and Die in LA, another like iconic one of his, and there's not that many movies that I associate him with. It wasn't that Mark Wahlberg and Reese Witherspoon movie Fear that was always on Irish TV when we were growing up. But he definitely is limited. I mean, I think there's a reason why he's become a TV actor in a very generic TV show, as opposed to after having made some really iconic movies in the 80s, he didn't really go on to become like a big time movie actor. So I think, yeah, so a lot of that material is just kind of crumbles in the hands of Petersen. Now, Mann is very good in terms of like bringing this style and atmosphere. You mentioned that like in Silence of the Lambs, they go for more of that spectacle with Hannibal Lecter, and they certainly do. I mean, all the Hannibal Lecter stuff in Silence of the Lambs is like watching Bram Stoker's Dracula or something. The gothic dungeon that he go into. It's funny when Graham goes to see Lecter in this, and it's just like a really banal prison cell, because Michael Mann wants to show like real, how things really are, kind of. What we're seeing is the actual same location, because you've got Dr. Chilton, I believe is his name, the character that Lecter famously says, "I'm having an old friend for dinner," at the end of Silence of the Lambs. That character is the same, and that location is supposed to be the same location. And they even, you can tell on the page it's the same. Like they're sat one inside the cell, one outside the cell, passing stuff back and forth, the jeopardy of of what's involved in passing someone to the other person. But obviously the approach is very different in terms of like art direction and set design and stuff like that. But other than that, it's funny because other than that, I would say Jonathan Demme is a much less stylized director than Michael Mann, chiefly because Michael Mann is one of the most stylish directors of his generation. So I think you look at the films he made subsequently, like things like Collateral and The Insider and stuff, they're, the whole color palette and everything going on in them is just so visually stimulating, all the music, stuff like that. So in Manhunter, you've got this overall stylish Michael Mann-ness permeating through the whole film. Whereas in Silence of the Lambs, it's a much more sort of grounded film. But then when she goes to Lecter's cell, then suddenly it gets like really gothic and really camp, I suppose, but in a really brilliant way. So that I thought was interesting. I agree. Tom Noonan brings a very sinister presence to it. I think he's fantastic in the movie. Like, it's an easy part to sort of undervalue. Like it's easy to go, oh, just hire a creepy looking guy to be creepy and job done. But I think he does have to navigate that whole love story thing. As that love story came in, I was like, this feels a bit like a Korean movie where the Koreans will often take like a genre film and then bring in sort of emotional elements that you might not have anticipated would be there without compromising any of the entertainment value of the genre conventions. And I think that's a brilliant left turn that that Manhunter does. I mean, it's all from the book. So I've actually read the book, which is very rare that I've read the book going into a movie. Granted, I read it when I was a teenager, and the portrayal of the Tooth Fairy in that book is terrifying, and all that stuff with the lab assistant or whatever she is, Joan Allen's character, is in the book. But it's still it's great to see it, and it just gives us like a whole bunch of other things. I love the way it's at once quite tender and gives us just a little bit of hope that he could maybe transcend his demons and just become like a nice guy, but at the same time, every interaction that he has with her is still sinister. So it's not like he like becomes like a super nice, completely clean guy, and then when he sees her, you know, what he thinks is kissing that guy, he snaps. It's like even the fact that like his first date with her, he's showing her the videos of the people he has killed and the people that he will kill and stuff. So it's a great mixture of him being like someone that could be saved and him still incredibly far from being saved. But yeah, Tom Noonan plays it really well. And it's a shame that he didn't become a more prominent character actor. I mean, I could have imagined him like Steve Buscemi or someone just kind of maybe getting a major TV show or just in general being a little bit more embraced. I know him because of this movie. So whenever I see him in movies, which sometimes is Michael Mann movies, or, you know, he pops up here and there, the reason he sticks out in my head really is because he's the Tooth Fairy, Dollarhide. You mentioned it's the second best Hannibal movie. I mean, I certainly agree with that, but that's, as you said, damning with faint praise. You've got one of the best films of the 90s, the best serial killer of all time movie, I would say, better than Seven, better than Zodiac, just, you know, absolutely phenomenal. Better than M. Yeah, it's an absolute masterpiece. So it's not as good as that. And then you've got, you know, Red Dragon and Hannibal, which both just did absolutely nothing for me. And then you've got Hannibal Rising, which I haven't seen, but be very surprised to find that it can touch Manhunter. I really like Manhunter, but, you know, can't help but compare it. And in terms of the director's cut, question of whether or not you watched the director's cut, did you see at the end a scene where Petersen goes back to the house of the family that he saved? In other words, the family that would have been Dollarhide's next targets. If you saw that scene where he just like goes to the door, has a brief exchange with them, and then goes home, saw that, then you saw the quote-unquote director's cut, though I don't think it's actually sanctioned by Mann, because I don't think he would allow the constant flipping back and forward in visual quality that the so-called director's cut has. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Director's cut has a lot more of Petersen's wife, which doesn't help the movie, just slows it down. It really, the only interesting thing about watching the director's cut is just seeing good editing decisions where, like, every time you see one in the seat where it switches to a really bad picture quality. Sometimes it's a scene, sometimes it's just a little few lines of dialogue. You go, yep, I agree with the decision to cut that out. So it's kind of interesting in that regard. But yeah, I think if I go back to this film in the future, it will be the non-director's cut theatrical version. Yeah, good movie. I think this kind of action scene at the end where Petersen like smashes through the window is a bit ridiculous. And yeah, again, you ain't gonna see Clarice do that. I mean, Silence of the Lambs ends with maybe the most thrilling it's not right to say action scene. That's the wrong term. But you know, understanding that I'm using that incorrectly, Silence of the Lambs ends with one of the most thrilling action scenes I've ever seen, which is this sort of night vision goggle shoot out with the girls in the pit, and when she first notices all the like moths around everything, it's just phenomenal. So the version of that we get in this isn't as good, although I love that really loud music playing all the time. I mean, they create a lot of atmosphere there, but then when it comes down to actual brawling, it drops down a bit for me.
Fucking new phone will be the death of me, man. Just getting back to you, with what message you sent earlier on. It is interesting to think of Manhunter in the same way as something like Rafifi. Like you mentioned that this may or may not be one of the first archetypes for a serial killer movie. Now, I don't know how true that is. It seems to be pretty true because I did a quick Google. I might be way off. You might be way off as well. I don't know. The only one that springs to mind, and this is because I was looking at a YouTube video about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it had references to other movies that it mentions both directly and indirectly, and it mentioned the Dirty Harry movies. And I know one of the Dirty Harry movies is inspired by the Zodiac Killer. I think he's called Scorpio, and that's 1983. Now, I don't know how much of that movie follows that archetype of serial killer being hunted in the way we know it, like Silence of the Lambs, or just the blueprint that's very much there in Manhunter. I don't know if that's there in the Dirty Harry movie, because I actually haven't seen it, to be honest. I saw the first Dirty Harry and I thought it was decent, but not enough to check out the rest of the franchise at the time. So that kind of gets me back to the central thing you brought up about Petersen's performance. How much of it is the actor's fault, and how much of it is the reason why I brought up Rafifi was when we watched this, we both thought that the blueprint in that movie has advanced significantly from the time we've seen it. Now, that doesn't take away from the fantastic scene of the robbery itself, but the archetypes and the central themes have advanced since then. So I'm wondering if we take this as, which is unproven, but if we take this as the first blueprint of that clairvoyant character, how much of it is down to Petersen's acting and how much of it is down to the beginning of that trope? I could imagine somebody like Jake Gyllenhaal. My cat wants to get involved in this podcast episode. Listen, I'll play with you in a minute. She's going to run me off my train of thought now. Don't know what I was saying. But yeah, I could imagine Jake Gyllenhaal playing that kind of savant, working stuff out in his head. In fact, I'm pretty sure he has done it in movies quite well. And I could imagine him as the modern day successor to that Petersen dynamic. And I do agree that some of it is down to his acting as well. But I wonder how much of it. Now, it seems to be proven that, based on where his career went, that he is at a much lesser level of some of the names you've mentioned. But it is interesting to look at it through that lens of maybe it's not so much that he's bad in those scenes, which, again, I'm kind of with you that he doesn't add to those scenes as much as another actor would, but maybe it's the lines he's been given as well, you know? The other thing I was going to say is, yeah, the ending is quite ridiculous. The way he sees the Tooth Fairy killer at the other side of the pane of glass, and Petersen's got a gun, and instead he runs through the glass, smashes the serial killer, and like loses complete initiative and upper hand in the fight. It's a pretty ridiculous moment, but I did enjoy the gunfight after that moment. But again, if you compare that with the scene in Thief at the very end, it doesn't even come close. So we know Mann can stage things a hell of a lot better. Maybe it's in the book. You also mentioned that the book sets the scene for a lot of the visual choices in the movie. I believe that's what you alluded to. I might be wrong, so feel free to correct me. If it is in the book, I still feel like a big job of the director is to visualize what words and images come to your mind when you read it, because different people might read a different book and might imagine different things. Now, I'm not an avid reader, so maybe if it's described so well everyone imagines the same thing, I doubt it, but that's not my wheelhouse. So I think a lot of the staging is very well done in general anyway, and I'd give the director credit to that. But again, I haven't read the book, so maybe it is all there in the book. And you mentioned as well that Silence of the Lambs, I mentioned the cinematic moments, and you mentioned the Anthony Hopkins scene as being the really like gothic visual flourishes of the movie. But you know, if you think about it, that movie's filled with them as well in more subtler ways. Not to make this a Silence of the Lambs review or subject and take over from Manhunter, but just because you alluded to it and a lot throughout this your last message, that it did spring a few things to mind. That infrared sequence is brilliant and very cinematic and very well crafted, and there's a few scenes that I didn't actually get at the time, but now that I'm older, the way we see Jodie Foster's character feeling the presence of like the male gaze and things like that is very well done. And the famous crosscut as well. So it is filled with a lot of memorable visual moments and whatnot. And obviously we know that Mann is much more stylistic and much more highly thought of for good reason than Jonathan Demme, if that is his name. But I think that's probably the height. Well, actually, I don't know what he's directed after that, but I feel like if you just saw Silence of the Lambs, you probably would think that Demme is on another level. But I guess subsequent movies, which the very fact that they don't come to my mind, probably shows that like maybe he wasn't all that after that. Oh yeah, and just another thing that I just realized. Did you notice that I think his name is Frankie Faison? He played Burrell in The Wire. He's got a scene in Manhunter But I'm realizing he's also the nurse or minder of Hannibal in a bunch of other movies. So he's actually pretty much nearly in all of the movies. I don't know if he's in the prequel. I doubt it. But yeah, it's funny that he's in the true line of a lot of the movies. But yeah.
Yeah, I did notice that guy from The Wire. I believe he's one of the main actors in Treme as well. On Jonathan Demme's career, I haven't seen all of his movies. Maybe I've seen like half of them. But straight after Silence was criticized for being like anti-trans or homophobic. Like that was kind of a bit of pushback on it. And he immediately, like as a response, made Philadelphia, which is like, you know, a brilliant film about AIDS, and a very strong follow-up. I mean, you're never going to beat Silence of the Lambs. That's like, it's kind of just one of these things where like you've made a movie that good that it doesn't matter how good the rest of your movies are, like they're just not going to be as good. But Philadelphia is really good. And Rachel Getting Married, I believe, is the one with Anne Hathaway that came out maybe his last movie in, I'm guessing, like early 2010s. I think that's a fantastic movie as well. Now he has other movies that I haven't seen that are highly regarded, so I would definitely be up for like checking out his career a bit more. But I think he is a very strong director. What I was saying about like the Silence is a bit more visually subdued and leans into that stylized, not over stylized, like, but very stylized mode when it comes to the Lecter stuff. I purely mean by contrast to Mann, because Mann is one of the most stylish directors of all time. And I think like every time I've heard Mann being discussed, the word stylish has come up. So it's not that Silence of the Lambs isn't stylized. It's just, I think with Michael Mann, you just have like a dialogue scene of two people just sat there talking, and the colors and the music and everything will just be like so pushed so far that it's a contrast. But yeah, I do want to say, like, I really like Manhunter, had a lot of fun with it, and I just struggle to not compare it to Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my favorite films of its era. That Dirty Harry movie you're referring to, yeah, that did come to mind as like an earlier serial killer movie. But I mean, so the serial killer like boom, or whatever you want to call it, like when serial killing became like such a fixation of the media and everything, I guess like the 70s, that led to serial killer media, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, very famously inspired by real life serial killers, and there's a few other ones. But I think what we see in Manhunter, which from what I've seen of that Dirty Harry movie isn't quite there, is that the mode of like the FBI investigation. It doesn't need to literally be the FBI, but whether it's the FBI or another law enforcement agency that's kind of working on that profiling level, that genre is not really in that Dirty Harry movie, which I think I've sort of seen or partially seen as a teenager. It leans more into the Dirty Harry of it all, where it's like, you know, how you solve any problem is just like a man with a gun going out and just using his gun until he gets his man, you know. But whereas Manhunter is the earliest example I've seen, and I doubt it is the earliest example, but it's the earliest example I've seen of that kind of like profiling procedural movie that's now become incredibly popular. And there's obviously loads of like lesser movies that have been spawned over the years, and then a few great ones. But I wonder, because I believe the books were pretty popular before Manhunter even came out, and I wonder if Thomas Harris was the first kind of major blockbuster success of that like subgenre, or whatever you want to call it, of like FBI profiling methodology to catch a serial killer. And then, yeah, I agree that the Petersen, like the issue with those scenes where Petersen really shows his limitations, like when he's up in the tree talking and stuff, it is a fault of the script, 100%. The script in those scenes is very hammy, and it's a good script other than that. And it's maybe just, I don't know if it's just taking too directly from the book, something that, like, maybe in the book it's an internal monologue, and, you know, Michael Mann, who I believe wrote the script, was just like, I got to get all of these same lines out, but instead of just being in his brain, he's going to be saying it into a dictaphone, and then he's just going to say it out loud. It doesn't work for me. But like when Petersen is not tasked with delivering those lines, he does perfectly fine across the movie. Like I don't really have a problem with him as an actor, and I think as a TV actor, he's a good solid presence. Like I'm surprised that you've never seen CSI, but like he's a perfectly capable guy to like anchor that. I just think there is like a tier above him of actors that could get away with those ridiculous scenes and actually like sell them, and that's, you know, that's really commendable, but it's missing here. Again, I wish they had done that in voiceover. It's rare that like you're wishing that voiceover was used instead of like something else, but in the case, like ultimately he has to say all that stuff, whether he's saying it into a dictaphone, whether he's saying it in voiceover, where he's saying nothing throughout those scenes, but then later he's telling another person. But somehow we have to learn that this is what he's thinking and this is what he's processing. And I think they kind of did it in the worst way possible. So it's the one blemish on the movie, really. But it's got a lot going on. So yeah. Interesting that you haven't seen Dirty Harrys. I know that you absolutely adore Clint Eastwood. I haven't had much exposure to the Dirty Harrys myself, but that could be one for us to work through, that franchise.
Yeah, I think it was the character. Well, sorry, not that I think. I know it was the actor that played Bunk that's in Treme, not Frankie Faison, who was Burrell, but same body type. And I'm only up on his filmography because I was looking through it yesterday. So, and I'm rewatching Treme at the moment as well, so I might have made that mistake. I actually haven't seen Philadelphia or the other wedding one, funnily enough, regarding Jonathan Demme. And yeah, I saw the first Dirty Harry. Maybe it's something we can come back to. I was listening back to our voice notes regarding the other movies we've been talking about lately, and just to keep not score, just to keep a log. These are the movies so far we said we would be interested in potentially checking out, and that is Tape was one by Richard Linklater. The movies of Julia Desan, if that's his name. There was one or two other ones. I even forget now, but there's quite a lot of interesting ones we got put onto that I must put a note down somewhere before we forget. But Dirty Harry's definitely one. And yeah, there was a few others, but I can't remember them right now.
Yeah, I wasn't actually thinking of the guy who plays Bunk, who you're right is in Treme. I was thinking of Clark Peters, who plays Freeman in The Wire. He's one of the main characters in Treme, and yeah, looks quite similar to Faison. Yeah, like that ever-growing list of things. Like whenever I watch a movie, it's like it spawns about 4 movies that I'm like, I gotta check that out. But if you just do the maths on that, if every time you watch one movie, it does for me, unless your like rate of watching movies is growing to the power of 4 every single like time that you watch movies, then that's completely unsustainable. So I'm sure I'll never get to any of this stuff, but I like the idea of watching all of the Dirty Harrys anyway. As I like the idea of watching all of the Jonathan Demes and Tape and every Linklater that I haven't seen and all this stuff. And, you know, some of it I'll get to. But I guess you got to have this like, I mean, one thing that I think we both have is that we're never like at a loss for movies to watch. We've always got like literally hundreds of movies that we're very, very curious to check out. So, you know, it is a little bit sad sometimes when you go like, I'm just never going to see a hell of a lot of these movies. But at the same time, it's nice knowing that you're never going to run out of great movies. Remember when the pandemic happened and like it shut down the film industry, and we didn't know if the pandemic was going to last a week or the entire rest of our lives. And there was all sorts of like talk. It seems kind of ridiculous now, but people were, you know, talking about like, there's never going to be another movie made again. And every society is going to completely collapse. And so, and you know, not that I thought there was any credibility to the idea that we'd never make more movies, but I do remember thinking, well, if they never make another movie again, I'll never run out of movies. I could exclusively watch movies that I am very, very hopeful will be 5-star masterpieces for the whole rest of my life, and I still wouldn't run out. But yeah, I'm glad that they are making movies because I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff to come.
Yeah, the other thought I've had lately, let alone the movies I'll never get to in my lifetime, it's also, oh, this probably will be my last time watching this movie. I remember I watched Back to the Future the other day, and my partner, she hadn't seen it before, and I was thinking, this is probably it. This is probably the last time I'll see this movie again. Let alone movies that I will never see. It's like that scene in Blue Jay where Mark Duplass and Sarah Paulson, where they're looking at a shelf with all these books on it, and they're calculating how long they have to live to realistically be able to read all these books, and they're just looking at the shelf, and they just realize, oh, we're never going to live long enough to even get past the first shelf of this. And now it was a pretty big book shelf, but I'm 38. I think you're 38 as well. It's about that time where it's like, oh, well, I can watch these movies or that movies. Let me try and make a dent, and then I'll end up watching the latest Adam Sandler movie or Brothers again. So it ain't that deep.
Yeah, I can't actually remember that scene in Blue Jay, but I've seen that exact same thought experiment on YouTube where someone goes like, okay, how long does it take you to read a book? Like to us, it's irrelevant because we don't read books, but to a reader, it's like, oh, well, it takes me on average a couple of weeks. Like, how many books do you read a year? Like, typically, okay, well, I read 20 books a year. Okay, well, you're going to be alive for this amount more years. Multiply that by 20, you're going to read this amount of books. So of every book, the hundreds of thousands or millions of books that have been written, this is the amount that you're going to read. And, you know, if instead of reading 20 books a year, you're reading 5 books a year, then you're going to read a quarter of that amount or whatever. And it's the case now. Like, as you said, we're kind of getting to the halfway point in our life. And every time we rewatch Four Brothers, we're subtracting like a phenomenal like movie from the 1940s that's like an undisputed 5-star classic because we had to like go back to the well of Four Brothers for a third time. And yeah, as you said, even stuff like, you know, like Back to the Future is a perfect example, but like I'm thinking of, you know, something like The Matrix, or, you know, let's take the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is a massive undertaking, especially if you want to watch the extended editions. Like, I probably got one more. I'm probably going to get to see the Lord of the Rings trilogy one more time in my life, if that. Now, I know that I could be watching it every week for the whole rest of my life. It's not that like there's anything sort of empirically preventing me from watching it loads of times or tripling the amount of movies I watch or whatever. But being realistic, yeah, it's quite confronting to just, it's not that there's specific movies that I won't see, but just statistically, there's most movies I won't see, and it's I think the only real takeaway you can take from it is like, maybe be a little bit more judicious about what you watch, because you ain't gonna watch everything, and some stuff takes a little bit more effort, right, to watch, because it's like, this is going to be more work. I'm tired. It's the end of the day. I could just throw on like The Fall Guy, the new Ryan Gosling, dumb, stupid, like mediocre action comedy. And I know that's going to be no challenge whatsoever. But you know what? If I push myself, I could watch something a bit more challenging. And the less times that you do that, not to say that the more challenging ones guaranteed to be good, or that the dumb movies guaranteed to be bad at all. Like, obviously that's not the case. But like, the fewer times you do that, I think, the more you're like closing down and shrinking that pool of more challenging movies that you are going to get to. And thus you're going to miss out on a huge amount of the more challenging movies. And as much as we adore many, many kind of like popcorn, like easy entertainment movies, like thousands of them, it's still undeniably the case that like a lot of my favorite films, a lot of your favorite films do require that push, that kind of, you know what, I'm going to actually like focus on this and like, you know, lean forward a bit and not just kind of like casually throw on what dropped on Netflix this week. So, yeah, maybe we're a little bit too early in our life to be thinking that morbidly about it, but it is interesting to just think about it, isn't it?
Well, just to take it a little bit further, man, I remember when I used to watch, I think I managed this 1 year or 2 years at 365 movies in a year, even more. I think I did 374 that year. And I remember I calculated on my best year of watching a movie in my longest possible longevity of life, not something ridiculous like 120, but let's say 80 or 90, I calculated the exact number of movies I could watch based on the optimum statistics of watching a movie every day for the next like 40 years, and hoping that I live that long. And it's almost knowing the limitations of your life through film and knowing the limitations of one of your favorite hobbies. It was like knowing when you're going to die through the amount of movies you could possibly watch. Thankfully, I've forgotten that statistic. Like I said, it is very morbid, but that's what happens when you watch a movie about serial killers, I suppose.
Yeah, I've done a couple of those years myself where you kind of try and average a film a day, but at this point now, I have 2 months of the year, April and October, where I watch a film every day. And for the rest of the year, I'm kind of down to about a movie or two a week. And that's, it can get a lower amount than that. That's when I'm like, kind of, you know, feel like I'm watching movies a decent amount, would be 1 to 3 a week. But there'd certainly be plenty of weeks where I'd watch 0. So outside of my 2 big months a year where I watch a movie every day, I watch very little movies. So yeah, you throw that out across the coming 4 or 5 decades. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to get to see much. But yeah, I'm glad Manhunter was amongst them. Good flick.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.